Welcome to Women in Entertainment's In Her Words podcast. I'm Renee Rossi.
And I'm Gretchen McCourt.
And we're the co-founders of Women in Entertainment. Today's episode, we talked to Rachel Ghiazza, the EVP and head of U.S. content at Audible.
Rachel is a creative and executive powerhouse. The story that she tells of her journey to her position at Audible is so inspiring, so many twists and turns. We think you guys will really enjoy and get a lot out of it. Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Renee and I were talking before we started, and we hear so much about your business and what you're doing at Audible and your career. Today, we'd really like to hear your story. And I think we know you have an interesting story of your undergrad degree and how that's helped. So we just kind of like to talk about you a little more than what your company's doing today.
I'm very excited to be here, so I appreciate you having me. Not a topic that I talk about normally, but I think it'll be
uncomfortable.
Yeah, but it's fun, and it's also a good time to just reflect a bit too. I think we get so caught up in what we're doing and where we're going. Sometimes we forget to look back and say, like, what got me here? What have I done? And just take a minute to be proud and reflective and have that just be something that we celebrate a bit more too.
Oh, absolutely. We love a good pivot story or an unplanned pivot story is always great.
Being on life's journey.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
Going where the flow.
Exactly.
And our personal stories and our career stories are separate. Yeah. We find that they really do influence each other and those decisions we make. So tell us a little bit about what you thought you were going to do. Take us back to young Rachel.
No, I didn't really know when I started undergrad. I had an inclination that I needed to make money. So I rolled out, a lot of the fields where it wasn't kind of obvious that there was money at the end of those 4 years. So I started working in business. But when I started in business, there were a few courses that I took as like broader experience that really stuck for me. So one of them was ethics. And what I really liked about it was just a deeper understanding of humanity. And then also there was a lot of debating in ethics that I thought was super interesting. So, if you take this to be true and this to be true, do you also believe this is true? And there were some mechanics of that type of thinking that I was really interested in. Still enjoyed my business classes. And so I continued on that path, but I was doing ethics. And then when I was in college, because it was a while ago, a lot of the engineering stuff was so new, particularly as it pertains to computers. And so I also took a computer science course, and that really excited me. So I had always had a computer. My mom was early tech, a person, so she would have the first computer, I think, and she studied some computer science herself. And so I had, well versed, but I was mostly playing games and doing very lo-fi stuff. And so when I took the computer science course, it just really connected in my brain. So I started down a path of how can I actually use some of this ethics that I really like, a bit of sociology, computer science, and then marry that with business. At the time, there wasn't really this idea that they have now of like a product leader. That was not a field that existed. So I was looking at computer science, business, information systems, and so came out of undergrad with that degree and thought I would really stay in tech and science and engineering. My first couple jobs, so when I was in college, I was a programmer at NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association.
Oh my God.
They have a great app that I use every day.
And I went to Boulder, Colorado for undergrad, and they actually have a big operation in Boulder, and they have one of the atomic clocks there. So it was kind of cool
That's
to like
really
go
cool.
in. And then when I graduated undergrad, I was doing tech. So I was programming, but in a business way. So I was doing a lot of SQL and a lot of analytics and data and accessing like big databases and writing JavaScript in Excel to help me like process data faster. And I loved it. I thought it was just a really interesting way to connect to the business and problem solving and strategy and data. Um, so I really, thought this would be more of what I did for more time.
Yeah.
And I found myself at a job at Yahoo, and this was early days of digital. And I quickly realized this idea of taking something that people are doing and helping them do it in a less frictioned way
Mm-hmm.
was something that I got really excited and passionate about. And so it was during my time at Yahoo that I decided to go back and get a second degree, studying, more business and law, and seeing if I could use what I learned in technology and start to transition it to strategy and business in a more profound way.
Did you find in those early days of Yahoo, were you able to was it less siloed? Were the, like, departments and divisions able to flow through a little bit more now that, when it wasn't so huge?
Yeah, and it was able to flow through a little bit more. And I think also the culture of tech at that time was not
What year was that?
oh gosh, that must have been like
Like, was this pre
2000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at that time, the most people, you kind of went to work, you went to an office building, you sat at your cubicle and you
Mhm.
did your stuff. And Yahoo and those tech giants at the time were just starting,
Yeah.
and they were creating a culture of work can be play.
Right.
And I think that was incredibly exciting, and it gave you an opportunity to do what you loved, but also, if this thing they were working on seemed interesting, you could go work on that.
That's really cool.
It was more of a family. It
Mhm.
didn't seem as hierarchical. You would
Yeah.
see like the CEO of the company in a cube, just like
Mhm.
you sat in.
Did you find it really competitive back then?
I don't recall it being
Okay.
super competitive.
I feel like now it's so competitive, and it's from a recruitment standpoint, from a tech standpoint, Moore's law, and so forth. That I would be curious.
I remember working with incredibly talented people who were equally passionate about what we were doing. I think the one thing I do remember is that I was almost always the only woman,
Mm.
almost always.
Yeah.
So on my first team there, it was all men except for me and the executive assistant
Oh, wow.
of my boss.
Oh,
So
wow.
I
Okay.
remember that very clearly.
Uh-huh.
But everybody was supportive.
Okay.
But certainly you learned how to interact in an
Yeah.
environment that was, tech still heavily male
Yeah.
Mhm.
generated.
Mhm.
And then I moved into like business, FP&A, strategy, finance, also usually very male
Right.
dominated.
Right.
So I remember that pretty clearly.
Did you feel like you had to like kind of fight for yourself to be included, or was it
Was it just the room? Was it the perception, or was it you felt it as a woman?
You definitely know that you're different. So
Okay.
it's hard to,
Mhm. Mhm.
avoid that part of it. Obviously, the people that I've worked with, I- I'm really still quite close with many of
Mhm.
them. So it was such an incredible environment to meet people who are like-minded.
Mhm.
So a lot of us were similar age and like
Yeah.
similar experiences,
Yeah,
living in
points in your
similar
life.
places
Yeah.
and points in our life. But yeah, you're definitely like, there would be like things about like, did you guys know the bathroom's broken and like didn't like hurt anyone? 'Cause
Like,
there's
no,
only
we
like
haven't been in
3
there.
people
Day-to-day
using
basic
it.
Yeah.
functions.
So there's definitely that. And I'm also, I think you learn to be a bit of a chameleon too,
Mhm.
because all my courses in undergrad were also all male.
Yeah.
So I had just at that point become very, very used to it. I, I'm not joking you. I think in every single one of my computer science classes, I don't think there was ever another woman.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
And that no, that's the history of
Yeah.
the industry or of that sector, that it really wasn't, and not encouraged.
And
The
not
fact that I'm still thinking about your mom being, I mean, that's really that was
That's a
that's
game changer.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, that your mom was in tech and had a computer and was interested in in that era, and it's not that long ago, but
I know.
right?
it's different. And my sister's a electrical engineer,
Oh my
so
gosh,
we
yeah.
were just like, you know what, whatever. We're
Yeah,
all
Yeah.
going
yeah,
into tech, and we're gonna love it, and talk about it. And so you just get used to it.
yeah,
Yeah.
But now I love seeing all the women entering STEM.
mhm,
I love walking through the office, and where I work now at Audible, we are very mindful about making sure that we represent the world in which we operate. And so
mhm.
you don't really see that. Sure, there's still more men in those
Yeah.
fields, but you see a lot more balance now, both in terms of gender and other backgrounds.
I love the idea that as you or loving tech and loving business and loving ethics and using all those, how do you still feel as your career moved on that you still touched on all of those pieces? They still informed how you worked and how you structure your companies?
I 100% feel that way as I moved more into the content side.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think to myself, wow, people who do this job without that
Yeah.
foundation, incredible,
Mhm.
because you have to be able to go and talk to your finance partners, your CFOs, find a common language, understand what they're looking
Yeah.
for and why. In these, day and age, it's also important that you can go and talk to your product and tech folks.
Mhm.
You can understand what they're doing and why. And obviously, now I'm nowhere near proficient in those fields as those technologies have changed so
Yeah.
much,
Mhm.
but it does create a much easier way to collaborate and understand the perspectives that different people have.
Mhm.
If you have that finance background, you understand a lot more about what is my CFO worrying about? What
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
the things that she's thinking? We need to deliver this, this, and this. It's just a different mindset, and you understand somebody a little bit differently. And I think that creates a really powerful foundation.
Yeah, you almost have like a work empathy for
Yeah.
each of those areas that when you can kind of step in someone's shoes and understand that what they're concerned about or what they're working on. That's very, I have this visual in my head of, everyone's right brain or left brain, and your whole brain is going with the creativity and the business and tech side. It's very valuable.
Yeah, and I always thought I was more like, you know, tech data brain. And then I realized somewhere in my career that I'm actually not those things. I'm much more of a creative brain. And then where I fell into programming, I think I fell in love with it because it was very creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no two people code the same way.
Right.
It is telling a story. It's just a
Mhm.
different way of doing it. And so that was a realization for me is I think if you're proficient in something, you think that that's, what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You don't always take a beat to figure out, but what am I passionate about?
Mhm.
Like, what is the thing that brings me joy?
So, what led you to audio? You were at Spotify, now you're at Audible.
Yeah.
Um, what did you see that, like, what was the turning point for you to say, wow, this is where I'm going to put my time and this is something I'm passionate about?
So I feel like most people would expect me to say, so I'm dyslexic, which is like a big foundation for a bunch of things that have
Mhm.
set the tone. So I think most people would suggest that, oh, I'm dyslexic, so I fell into audio because it's a good way to capture information. That's not my path and journey. So
Mm.
I started when I was at Spotify. One of the jobs that I had was helping think about new business lines and help
Yeah.
think about how to transform the company into new things. And so one of that was thinking about how to bring different types of content to Spotify, and
Yeah.
podcasts obviously were an interesting area in that. So started getting involved in podcasts, started to understand more about the community and the audience, and taking it really from the creator partnership approach. And that started to really excite me because you start to uncover really talented people. So,
Yeah.
you know, the first time I listened to Slow Burn, I was like, what? This is so good. Like, who's this Leon Nafat guy?
Mhm.
I need to
Yeah.
know all the things about him. And it started to just personally open up a whole new way of experiencing media that I just hadn't before.
Mhm.
And I started to get excited because historically, what I had been doing is taking things that we're already doing and then
Yeah.
less friction ways of doing it, moving to digital, moving from, you know, linear to OTT,
Yeah.
we're moving from
Mhm.
download to streaming.
Mhm.
And this, I was like, oh, I get a chance to introduce a whole new medium. Yes, it's
Very
the
cool.
oldest form of storytelling,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and if it's going to delight me this much, somebody who I would have told you if I have anything besides music in my headphones ever, like no way.
Yeah.
I'm such a music person. I don't even have a TV at home, so I would, you know, I get home and I listen to records or I listen to music. I just never really thought about it, and it delighted me so much that then I was passionate about, okay, everybody needs to know about this. I
Yeah.
found this great thing. How do I tell everybody?
Mhm.
Because if it could do this for me, I want to give that to others.
Yeah.
So I started enjoying the as a like, for myself,
Yeah.
and then figuring out how do I do more in that part of the industry.
It's so interesting because I
That's
think the
really
one thing about podcasts when you're talking about storytelling is everybody uses their imagination. Like you don't have like if you're not obviously putting it on YouTube or you're not watching it in that way, but you're starting it's book telling, right? You're
Mhm.
imagining the characters, you're imagining the story, you're imagining the set, which is something that I think attracts so many people to this medium.
Well, and that it's funny that you mentioned that. Audible has a study out of the UK actually looking at the brain waves that hit when you're watching, reading, or listening. And if you think about it, when you're watching or reading, like you're processing other stuff
Yeah.
too. When you're listening, it's just your imagination.
Yeah.
And so you see that and like register in a powerful way. Very exciting. Also, a chance to, it, you can take it anywhere.
Right.
I could go on the
Yeah.
train and on my way into work, I could figure out what's going on in the world. I could figure out, you know, what happened with Prince Harry. Like you just get to know all the great stuff,
Uh-huh.
and you can take it anywhere with you. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to just be something that you do when you're home or you get a minute to disconnect. So it opened up this world of excitement and passion
That's
and
amazing.
Yeah.
imagination, and like I need to share this.
What was your first podcast you worked on and like what do you remember like nerves or like I don't know what I'm doing? Like what was that like for you when you first like kind of entered this type of this medium?
So I have been mostly on kind of the business connecting,
Okay.
like creative
Mhm.
side. And so the thing that I started to understand was there's a lot of really great content.
Mhm.
How do you get it to people?
Yeah.
And how do
Mhm.
you create that connectivity? And the other part of it was how do you create a sustainable business model? And ads are hard.
Mhm.
Ads are really hard.
Yeah.
And to get big enough where you're making a sustainable income on that is
Yeah.
hard. So I started thinking about a lot of that. And as I started working through that, that then gave me an opportunity to think about the creative side of it in a different way,
Yeah.
because what I was trying to do is say, how do we take what's out there and then how do we use this creativity to create a better infrastructure and business model for this, and then could start going talking to talented people to say, hey, I really think there's an opportunity in narrative storytelling. I love like what we're doing here and I think this is really great, but I think that there's an opportunity to go and tell big entertainment stories in this
Mhm.
medium. And so I started working on how do we do something where we create this epic world? How do we do something that's cinematic? Like,
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
looking at all the top genres in film and TV, it's sci-fi, it's action
Yeah.
adventure,
Mhm.
and in podcasting, it was news and true crime, which love.
We're all
very
true
much
crime.
love.
Yeah.
We all love it.
Love. But
Diversifying the
there's
content.
such a
Yeah.
big opportunity. And then I started working with creators to say, hey, I think that this is a medium where if you're telling sci-fi stories, if you're telling action adventure,
Yeah.
you can build a world like everybody gets to imagine differently. You can build
Mhm.
the biggest world that you've ever thought about. And there's probably no way that you've been able to do this before.
Yeah.
So those were the starts of how do we connect all these different
Yeah.
pieces together, bringing in kind of the things that I've loved as a consumer, but also talking to, the talent and creatives to say, hey, like, you've been writing this incredible stuff. You're an amazing storyteller. Have you ever thought about doing audio? And then how do we pair that with, the sound and the performance and bringing all that together?
Have you been surprised at how responsive the talent has? Like, there's so many people that
Yeah.
that you have that they're so known as this,
Yeah.
and now they're thriving in a whole different area. Have you been surprised at how open they are to try what you're talking about?
Been in love with it, to be honest. The first thing I love is that you can be a professional narrator.
Hmm.
I love that people follow narrators.
Right. Oh, it's a skill.
It's like
Such a skill.
it's such a skill. It's a different type of
Mhm.
celebrity, but I love that. That's a whole world.
Hmm.
It's a whole area where people can enter in, less gates than some other things that people
Mhm.
are used to. So
Yeah.
that I love. Yes, and working with talent has been like the writer talent, because like talent's such a big word.
Right.
But,
Right. Right.
working with the different teams that connect the different pieces. You have so many people who've been working in music for so many years and sound engineering, and now they get to do spoken word. And that all has come together in a
Mhm.
way that I think it's just starting. We're just at the beginning of it,
Mhm.
but more and more people are connecting to the power of the format and the power of being able to say, hey, what can I infinite imagination? What can I create?
Very cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Do you find that with the formats, what formats work better? Like, are you playing around with that? I know that you've talked a little bit on other podcasts and in media around different formats of doing the podcast or making it episodic, making it seasonal. What works? What do you find works better in what type of I guess format?
So this probably comes from my whole background.
Yeah.
I've always been, I wouldn't say like I'm a rule breaker.
Yeah.
But I'm extremely curious,
Mm.
and I've always tried to figure out how to like, okay, like we solved that problem, like what's next? So this has been exciting for me because there isn't necessarily a way of doing, like there's no
Yeah.
playbook for how this gets done. I think there are things that we're learning work really well in certain things, right? There's always on episodic things
Yeah.
that work.
Mhm.
You need to know your news. You want to be able to connect to things like, hey, I really love hearing about what women are doing. I want to have a more constant update and like introduce me to different people and different
Yeah.
stories. And so there are areas where that always on episodic stuff works.
Mhm.
And certainly there's different lengths that probably work for different people. Like
Yeah.
I'm always astonished that some people can do like 2 hours of those episodes. I'm
Right.
like, I'm a little bit like shorter consumption. And then there's some things that work really long in long form.
Mhm.
Yeah.
People want to spend a lot of time on it. Like if you pull up some of our biggest sci-fi content, the consumption for that is 30 hours. And people want
Wow.
their
Wow.
30 hours. They want to
Wow.
go deep into the story.
Mhm.
It's way too complex to try and condense it.
Yeah.
You want to have that journey. You want to have that. So there are formats that are very clear
Mhm.
work in
Yeah.
certain degrees. There's a lot of playground in the middle.
Yeah.
A lot of playground in the middle. So we've been experimenting not just with length and format and delivery, but also different types of people who tell stories.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we launched a program with musicians, and it's a bit of a biography for some of them, but they're able to tell a story and then add music to punctuate that story. So it's sort of like, hey, I'm sitting across the campfire with some of my favorite musicians, and they're telling me a campfire story with their guitar.
Very cool.
And
Okay,
it's been really fun to see how they think about, hey, like I get to tell this story in this way. It's not me putting on a performance. It's not me saying, like, this is what this song is about. It is me telling a story like I would to my friends, either
Yeah.
about my
Mhm.
life
Mhm.
or this thing I'm passionate about. And those are 90 minutes. And we've figured out that that's like a good length. Telling 90 minutes of story is actually kind of, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long.
So we have all these different areas. I think another fun one we've been doing is in the theater space.
Mhm.
So we have the lease on the Minetta Theater in the West Village,
Really? I didn't realize that.
which is like drops from where I used to live. So it's a fun area to go to. And we put on all kinds of different live performance, capture the audio, and then put that
Oh,
out for
okay.
broader
Cool.
distribution. So we're experimenting.
Right,
And
right.
that's one thing I really love about audio, but I also really love about Audible as part of audio. So
Yeah.
our founder and chairman, Don Katz, I think he shares that creativity. Like
Mhm.
he's what you would think of as like your quintessential like entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
Like he's an idea factory. And that's really inspiring
Mhm.
because again, you're not coming in with like these rigid things. It
Yeah.
sort of reminds me of my early days at Yahoo, where it's like, oh, we get to play, we get to
Yeah.
explore, and like I'm not
Yeah.
just punching the clock for my 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And I feel that very much at Audible, but also in the audio space.
That's awesome that
That
it's
is.
part of the ethos of the brand that it stayed that way, especially, based on your parent company and so forth, that it still has that spirit to it.
Very much so.
That's great.
Yeah, and that for me, I require that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
my work.
That's fantastic.
What's the I'm checking myself to see if I should be embarrassed about how many podcasts I listen to. What's the do you know how many what's the average your average listeners, how many podcasts they listen to regularly? Is there
Yeah,
like an average number?
because we have all the different formats,
Uh,
we
Yeah.
tend to look at like listening time.
uh,
And folks are listening, on average 2 hours, I think a day.
oh, 2 hours a day.
Yes, a day.
Okay.
I gotta check with the expert. So 2 hours
Okay.
a day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that
Okay.
is
Well,
I'm
it's
not
commute-
feeling
to be-
so embarrassed
Yeah,
now.
I was gonna say it's like that's my commute time. 1
Yeah,
hour in,
exactly.
1 hour. It's like that's a subway ride. That's very doable.
it's very doable.
Yeah.
And if you also think about all the different ways you're listening.
Mhm.
So, right now I'm listening to a longer title.
Right.
I just need to know what happened.
Mhm.
And
I was
then
gonna say, what are you listening to?
listening to Spare, as is most of the
Oh,
world,
yeah,
I think,
yeah,
right
yeah,
now.
yeah.
And then sometimes I want to listen to, something a little bit
Quick bites, yeah.
shorter and quick
Yeah.
bites.
Mhm.
What I think is fun, and Audible spent a bit of time since I've been in this role. One thing that I was extremely passionate about was just making sure we were customer first,
Mhm.
customer obsessed.
Mhm.
It's again another part of our DNA. And when we start to think about the content that we create and the content that we curate, we think about it from a customer point of view.
Yeah.
And so some of the biggest customer things that we see, I've talked about action adventure, sci-fi, mystery thriller. I
Mhm.
tend to call those like cinema for your
Mhm.
ears.
Mhm.
That's probably our biggest
Okay.
listening area. But we also see a lot of activity in, some of the romance and space where
Mhm.
you can kind of connect rom-coms are
Yeah.
big.
Mhm.
And burgeoning, which is a big passion for me, is in the health well-being space.
Mhm.
And I like the idea of, it's not just self-dev, although that's part of it. It's sort of like, how do I learn from others things that have helped them live their lives, but better?
Mhm.
And how have I learned tricks and trades and different things? Like, it's really good if you start your morning with a bit of meditation.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Sure, I've heard that, but like, what does that
I'm not a
mean?
still. I do not have that
Yeah,
gene
Yeah.
to say
yeah.
let's
Like,
be
what does that
still.
actually mean? And like, hearing from a bunch of different experts about
Mhm,
like, here's
Yeah.
what it meant to me.
mhm,
That's an area that's really growing. And then probably my personal favorite is journalism,
mm.
um, which
Immersion
is
is
a
good.
kind of a combination. Like, if you think about true crime, which I love, and then taking that one step
Yeah.
further and
Yeah.
saying, like, how do we actually look at these incredible things that have happened
Mhm.
and go a little bit deeper in how did this happen and
Yeah.
where are we at? Like, that is a space that I personally consume a lot of.
Yeah, no, there's that crossover is amazing. The Alec Murdoch trial that's starting, and Mandy Matney and her podcast and what she did to bring that trial to life is, I always think back to that, and her like little gumption of getting that podcast and going is amazing.
It's so good.
Yeah, yeah.
And, there is a lot happening at any given time. Being able to have a space to tell that
Mhm.
story and be able to have a richer experience than maybe what you can get on a quick news bite
Mhm.
or a TV news report. So we kind of think of ourselves a little bit more like the 60 minutes of audio
Right, right.
storytelling. But it's an incredible amount of stuff though that goes into telling those stories. Lots of research, there you have to be mindful of all the different types and parts of the story. And so
Yeah.
while you might come out with like a 60-minute piece, what it took to tell that is just incredible.
Right, much longer.
How do you, it's like there's so many podcasts, how do you find what works best, or how do you uncover that new talent?
Yeah.
Where I think that a lot of celebrity have gotten into the podcast, but there's so much other, some people create their celebrity at a podcast.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of navigate that?
So I have a couple different ways. There's obviously stuff that I read and hear about, stuff we're creating. But there's a woman who works at Audible with me. Her name's Diana DePito, and she's been with the company forever. She knows all the good stuff. Everything good. I mean, her and her team, like, I can go to them and be like, hey, I was sort of interested in this. And they're like, and they send the thing to me. So I think as the industry is continuing to grow and evolve, you're
Yeah.
also starting to find people who are curation experts.
Mm.
Yeah.
You
Mhm.
start to see a little bit more of course, at the end of the year, it's like, these are the top 10 things to listen
Right,
to. But
right.
I think you're now starting to find more professionals who are thinking about how do we put a curatorial layer on top of this to help
Yeah.
me figure that out a bit
Mhm.
more. And then what's trending. The coolest part of audio is I do think celebrities can help bring more awareness,
Mhm.
but you're not going to carry a story with a celebrity. So
Yeah.
performance is incredibly important, but celebrity alone won't do that, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it is an area where it's really democratized that, and it really is about how good is the story,
Mhm.
how good are the characters, and how good is the performance, and that's going to keep people interested in it. And that's where I've talked about these incredible narrator communities that exist, and it's fun to play there and know that, hey, there's so much to explore, and then
Yeah.
getting a little bit of help and figuring out where to go.
Are you seeing, podcasting as an extension of content? If somebody's pitching a script to Amazon Studios, does it come to your desk as well to say this could be a great extension?
Yeah.
Is that something that is changing in the industry, that you're seeing this as a medium that's being taken very seriously as they're starting to create these properties?
Absolutely. Sometimes I still think we're seen as like, the kids' table. I'm working on that. But there's a lot of opportunity. I tend to think about the ability to create a world.
Mhm.
And I use this analogy a lot. So anybody who knows me who's listened to this, it's like, oh gosh, she's using that again. But talk about the like wiki wormhole.
Yeah.
So whenever I like experience something I really like, I'm either Googling about the person who's performing. I'm either Googling about like,
Mhm.
is this real? What's next? Like, I probably have like Googled like what is the family tree for the Game of Thrones like about a bajillion times. Right? So when you find something that you love, you do want more.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so when things can travel across medium,
Mhm.
you get an opportunity to do that and you can connect to it in a way that you couldn't before. So I think less about, a straight adaptation. Um, I don't necessarily think about, the behind the scenes stuff, but I know people love
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
too.
Mhm.
I'm more like, how can I extend this? Like,
Mhm.
that character was extremely interesting.
Yeah.
What's the backstory on that
Right.
character? Or what happened after this?
Yeah.
And you can do that between theater, you can do that in film, you can do that in audio. And as you've seen people connect to all the different spaces, you're also starting to see more companies participating in all those different mediums
Well, they have to
for that
extend that
reason.
IP.
Yeah.
That's the value, is the more they can extend that IP, the better it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the holy grail eventually is, can I turn this into some type of merchandise?
Right, right, right. Well, back on the business for a second, the what Renee asked, that balancing of the celebrity and the new voice, is that is the business challenge of that getting less? Like, do the advertisers, do they, they don't, are they more open to, it might not be a household name, but it's a great story. How has that business side of it evolved?
So Audible is in an interesting position just as somebody who's been working in the space that
Yeah.
has, a bit more opportunity to lead here.
Mhm.
When I was thinking about coming to Audible, one of the things that floored me. So this was like, 4 years ago. I think we talk about things like inclusivity and diversity much more now, which hooray. But at the time I was talking to Audible, they're based in Newark, New Jersey. And I'm like, that's interesting. I like, tell me more about this. And as I started to really understand the company ethos, I was just exhilarated. Like, this company cares about more than just what they do. They care about the community they serve. They care about using this amazing, thing that they have to reach all these customers to celebrate. Our chairman, again, has a statement that I just hold on to, which is, we celebrate the glories of the human spectrum. And I had seen, obviously, I've been at companies
Yeah.
where, you have your charity day and you have your different things that you do to give back. I had not yet experienced a company where it was DNA, part of
Mhm.
the DNA, part of everything that we do. We have programs in Newark where we help, local people growing up in Newark. We give them paid internships. We help them go to college and then they come back after college. You find people who have gone through those programs who are now in,
That's incredible.
fairly senior positions at the company, and you realize they've been doing this for 25 years, not just,
Yeah.
after it became something we were all more aware of, which is
Mhm.
great.
Yeah.
And so we've had this big part of our DNA since we've started thinking about content and making content. And so we dedicate quite a lot of time to ensuring that we're telling stories and we're giving people opportunities. One of my favorite stories is we have a theater, like a playwright fund. So we
Mm.
help, emerging playwrights
Yeah.
come, and that's a really active area for us. And one of our playwrights that came through that program created this project called Evil Eye. It's incredible. So if you want to find something that like breaks down like the podcast audiobook format, it's like, a perfect length. It is an enthralling story. It's so good. And then it was picked up by Blumhouse and distributed by Amazon as a show. And you think about it, this is like this emerging playwright, not
Yeah.
didn't have a name for herself yet, did this incredible project, was able to get a lot of real excitement on it, and then now has a film.
That's amazing.
That's
Oh my
incredible. Yeah.
gosh. And was she interested in I mean, was it cinema, or was
She
she
was a
she
playwright.
was a playwright?
She was
Oh
a
my
playwright.
gosh.
And just what a journey, right?
Right?
And so you see it
Yeah.
works, right? And when you start to have more inclusivity in the stories that you tell, you also get better storytelling.
Yeah.
Right, right.
That's unparalleled, if you have all of that diversity and you're giving all those shots, you're going to have an unparalleled
Mhm.
portfolio of content.
I love that inclusivity. I mean, you've added even another category to it, where it's not just who you are or what you look like or what your background is. Now it's where you thought maybe you were pigeonholed in this, and we're going to give you opportunity to have your story go elsewhere. That's it adds even another layer to it.
Yeah, because I think when you're in a group, obviously you want to tell stories, but just because I'm in a group doesn't mean I can't tell stories that many people find interesting, right? So, giving people the opportunity to say, come, do what makes you passion,
Hmm.
Yeah.
create what's in your mind, do what's real to you. But that can be for so many different
Yeah.
people. We're human. We relate to so many different elements. Even if it wasn't my exact experience, doesn't mean that I'm not very excited
Yeah.
to, explore and learn more. Or maybe there's way more to your experience than my experience than I even thought
Yeah.
until I started listening. Like,
Hmm.
I'm now super connected to this. Like, if I can connect to the avatar worlds, you know, there's so much about just the human experience that we all connect to. Like,
Hmm.
that is what storytelling is. And so giving people the opportunity to do all of that.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a harder question. Um, if you look back on your career or you look back on a project, was there a pinpoint or a challenge that you faced that you go back and you're like, this is what I want people to learn from me? Like, if I could tell you one kind of like nightmare example that I went through, just because our audience is obviously, women and men and, that are coming up in the industry. And one of the things that we like to talk about, I think at our summit, which you experienced and so forth, is we love to help them avoid those types of situations. Is there something that you ran into or like a story that you're like, I think about it every day and I will not make that mistake again?
um, Fear.
Mm.
So things happen and they seem scary,
Yeah.
right? You think about, some of the layoffs that are happening right now. That seems really scary. And it is,
Yeah.
right? So it's not scary.
Hmm.
Sometimes we stay in jobs longer than we should because we're scared. Um, it's never as bad as it seems, right? That's
Yeah.
the thing that I've learned is sometimes you just have to know your worth, um, appreciate what you can do,
Hmm.
and leverage that forward. And one of the things that will help you do that best is to remind yourself that you're part of a bigger community. You have the network of people that you've
Yeah.
always worked with, you have the network of people that you've grown up with. Some of my colleagues at Yahoo have done just incredible things. We're all still connected. You're not alone. You're
Yeah.
part of a community, and that hopefully can make some things less scary.
Yeah.
If you're in a situation at work that just isn't bringing you enough joy, if you end up being laid off and that's super scary, and maybe you're feeling a little bad about that, um, you're not alone. You're part of a
Yeah.
community, and it's not as scary as you think.
Is there a moment that you let the fear go? That you were like, I'm worth this, and this is the moment that I'm stepping up and
Yeah, I've definitely had those moments, and um just terrifying, right? Like,
yeah.
you know, can't sleep at night, wondering if I did the right thing, but you just have to take the gusto. You have to listen to yourself. You have to think about the balance in your life. You only get one.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that you have enough joy in it. There has to be enough joy. And if that you don't have, you have to figure out how to do something different to get it. A good friend of mine wrote a book called Tickled. If you haven't, if you're looking for like a path, just what tickles you. Find out what tickles you, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your
That's a
profession.
great
Yeah,
title to a book.
I love that.
He used to write business books about like what companies do right and wrong, and then he was like, "This doesn't give me joy." And then wrote this title Tickled. And like it's about finding what makes you happy. And again,
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily have to be your career, but you want to make sure your life has enough of that in
Mhm.
it and that you have the right balance. If you're working too hard and the job gives you joy, that's fine. But if you're working really hard and your job doesn't give you joy and you don't have that in your personal life, that's not a life to live, especially not if you're doing it for fear. And, a lot of people come from different backgrounds. I did not come from a privileged background. I paid my way through undergrad. I paid my way through grad school. My parents do not help me. I sometimes help my parents. So, like,
Mhm.
we all have different experiences,
Yeah.
but you have to look out for you first.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great advice. And
Fantastic advice.
well, Rachel, thank you. Oh my gosh. It's been
Such a pleasure.
such a
Can I
pleasure.
do this every morning?
I know.
Absolutely.
I feel like we're all friends now. And thank you for
We're all tickled.
Yes, we are. I'm
I'm
tickled that.
telling you, it's such a wonderful thing to think about. Like,
Yeah.
I
what
feel
am I
like you
gonna
have
do
to
to,
plug your
like-
friend's name on
Yes,
Tickled.
tell us.
Oh, Duff McDonald.
Duff McDonald
He's gonna-
tickled.
Yeah, he's such a great person too. So
He came out with the best title, and we absolutely will read his book.
finding joy in your life is just so important. Always.
It is, and I like that you touched on you can find it at work. That
You can,
absolutely
yeah.
can be. But if it's not there, where
Find
is
balance,
it? Yeah,
yeah.
It's the balance of it. I think, with joy at work, it's like we're always going to have projects that we might be like plugging through, but there's always another one that you're like,
Yeah,
I'm so excited for. And
Yeah.
you just have to like kind of let the air in and to find that, and find that in yourself.
Yeah, and think about, like, is my cup full this morning? And
Right.
if it's not full today, what am I going to do to fill it back up?
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you for taking the
Thank
time.
you so much for having me.
It's been great.
And congratulations on the podcast.
Thank you.
I think this is super exciting. So I'll be listening.
Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with In Her Words, join the conversation by following Women in Entertainment on our social channels and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at womeninentertainment.com.